Not too bad on the solo there for one take, eh, Jim?
Who was playing that solo? Who would that be?
That's this guy right
Wow, excellent. I love that picture of your good wife. She is so clearly annoyed with you as that picture is taken. You could tell it's a happy moment for her,
right.
But also it's like, and I'm married to this guy.
happy annoyance would be a great and fitting description.
It might be the title of like your like co-authored autobiography of your marriage someday.
Yeah, right. Happy annoyance. That's perfect. Annoyance, she would fully agree with that too.
Just having met her, like the look is real, right?
It's real. For people who are just listening, you can't see. You got to go to YouTube and watch the amazing intro video.
And while you're there, hit like.
And hit like. And if you're here already, hit like, and please send us some questions, because here's the deal. Jim's traveling this week, so we've moved Freaky Friday to Wednesday, which officially makes it Whacky Wednesday. And we're going to take your questions. We're going to jam around. We're going to have some fun. This is officially the end of the week for Jim. And I have some potentially bad news. It may be the end of the week for me, Jim, because we've got
imminent death.
Well, maybe not that bad, but we've got 2 kids down with some toilet violence right now. Ooh. And we know how this tends to run through the family. I have not gone down yet, but we're on high alert. So if I sprint in the middle of this podcast, it's all on you after that. Yeah.
Last spring, my oldest son came home on leave, and after 48 hours here, this is an exceptionally strong young man, right?
Yeah.
Was taken out by a stomach virus, like violently for 36 hours. And it started at 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
All right. And then the very next night at 10 o'clock, 2 of his brothers went down.
Right.
At 10 o'clock at night. The next weekend, my wife and one of my other sons, 10 o'clock at night went down. The following Friday at 10 at night, I went down.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. It was all, I remember the day I got it. I went to the gym. I rolled Jiu-Jitsu. I felt like $1 million.
Yeah. Right.
Because it had been over a week since my house had it. So there was no sense that anyone was sick, that we were getting to. And then I got home at night about 10 and just went to like the 4th ring of hell, 36 hours. And then 2 members of our family got through it unscathed. Right?
Yeah.
And even though it's been like 6 months, they're still not prepared to spike the football yet, because that thing hung around the house for a while.
That's what I'm afraid of, because I've made too many early calls and then regretted it. Last time,
because I had spiked the football, I was like, I got through. You guys suck.
Yeah,
and cleans.
And I don't want to be over, because I had an amazing workout this morning. Jiu-Jitsu was great last night, so I'm feeling amazing. Yeah. But Roan, but like that went down real hard this morning. So guys, keep the Flynn family in your prayers here. It could get ugly.
All of a sudden, Pat's side of the screen goes test pattern. We know it's
right. But aside from that, what have you been up to, man? Before we dive into the Q&A,
hey, I'm going to St. Louis tomorrow for the American Catholic Philosophical Association. I'm giving a paper as part of a breakout session on evolutionary psychology. So
nice.
My boy Matt Ramage he's gonna hit it from a biblical point of view. And Matt Rossano, who is a very, very important evolutionary psychologist, is going to hit it from the scientific side. And I'm going to ramble on about Kant and Nietzsche. So there it is. It should be fun. Right?
That sounds like like Jim. I love it.
Yeah. And look, so I'm having a short week this week. Next week, I have to show up for 2 days. And then after that, it's after Thanksgiving break. And we all know what happens in college after Thanksgiving break. Not much. So
not a whole lot.
So basically,
podcasts. That's what
podcasts. Yeah, so we're on the brink of 6 weeks of me time. So
here we go. Man. Yeah, I imagine you'll probably do just some more writing and personal projects and stuff like that.
I haven't written much in the last couple months, as you know, so I'm going to probably write a bit. I got a lot. I'm in a big reading deep dive, so I do a lot of reading.
Yeah,
and probably train jiu-jitsu a lot. Right.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, dude, I wrote a book in the last 3 weeks. 42,000 word book. It's not the one I'm under contract for.
You just did it. It was there and you just ran with it.
This happens, right? I'm sure it happens to you. Like sometimes like it's the juice, right? It's the juice is there and you just go. So now I've got 42,000 words that I got to figure out what the heck am I going to do with this thing? So
I don't make myself write. If it's just not there, it's not there. I don't have an idea.
Right.
Or even if I have an idea and I'm just not ready to go with it, I don't go. But when I'm ready to write, I'll, like clear the schedule, right?
Yeah, because when it's there, you have to do it.
Yeah, I will push it to the edge of getting fired, right?
Yeah,
because it just has to happen. That
nothing can interfere. Yeah, 100%. All right, let's start taking some questions, my
see what the people have
friends.
to say.
Let me highlight a few here real quick. First off, I have to highlight this one. Andre says, "Good job on the new song, Pat. Somehow it resembles a heavier version of United Abominations by Megadeth, which is awesome. Jim, have you heard the new hit single, Creature of Wanting yet?"
I have not.
Yeah, I sent it to you.
Oh, no. You said, yeah, that's yours. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So
yet.
Let me put it in the show notes, SoundCloud. And it's a little different.
Because you were waiting on the lyrics for this one, right?
This is right. So Antifa Joe, my singer, he went crazy on this one, man. It's like it's got some like kind of like growly, whispery parts, and then a really cool harmony over the heavy guitar. So just to reiterate, I'm not the singer of my band, right? People still think that I sing. Pat Flynn doesn't sing. He just plays the guitar. He's just an instrumentalist. But yeah, check it out, guys. See if you dig it. We're not playing Budokan yet, but I do appreciate the kind words there. One more that's just quickly relevant. Danny said, since the name of this channel is Philosophy of the People, you should consider bringing on Peter Kraft, who just wrote a book about Mary titled The Greatest Philosopher Who Ever Lived. Well, funny you bring him up because I'm recently featured in a companion that is in tribute to Peter Kraft called Wisdom and Wonder. And I've got a chapter in this book. And if you like Peter Kraft, you might dig this. He's welcome on the show. I don't have his contact info, but if he's watching, you're welcome on. It ain't fun. Jim, I recently found out that he's got 86. He's written 86 books. That doesn't make sense to me, right?
Right.
That doesn't. I can't imagine having enough to say ever in my entire life to write 86 books.
Right. It's true.
Right.
It's true.
Yeah. Anyway, Jim, let me ask you a question. The first one here, in terms of, because Kraft is a popularizer, right?
Yeah.
And when I first announced this book, there was this posturing on my Facebook feed. There's always posturing, right? Oh, Kraft. He's for the people of low estate, right?
Yeah.
You have to read the real philosophers, as if nobody realizes this, right? You gotta always love the posturing that goes on, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like granted, he's a popularizer. Who do you, in terms of philosophical popularizers, who do you like? Who do you think are some of the best? I frequently come back to Adler. I think Adler is one of those guys who does a great job of bringing philosophy to the people, what we do, without diluting too much or misrepresenting what you'll find among like the top rate professionals of various positions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know of a philosophical popularizer that I'm into, right?
It's hard.
Yeah,
most popularizers are bad. Yeah,
like partly okay. I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna like walk it back in a way here, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that philosophy ought to be popularized. Okay, I'm not sure, and it's clear. Like if we look at the founders of it, like we think of like Plato's the founder and Aristotle is like, the Paul McCartney to that John Lennon, right? Okay, so you really can see how I think of those guys, right?
You're popularizing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think those guys certainly thought philosophy was going to be something that a very, very small number of people are actually going to do. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I mean? And so I'm not sure that like thinking of it in terms of popularization is at all in line with what like the grand tradition of it really is. Okay. Mm-hmm. But I'll say that is very different from somebody in the article industrial complex whining about a Peter Kraft. Right. Because I also would say like pretty much the article industrial complex isn't really philosophy either. Right. And it's attempting to make it into a very tamed, academically domesticated discipline suitable for the 20th century university. Do you see what I mean? Okay. So, and once again, like I see philosophy as a lifestyle, right? More than I do as some kind of discipline. Does that make sense? And so I am struggling with that issue of popularization because here we are, we're doing it, right? Okay. But I think we're primarily trying to do it by like kind of an example of what a life of inquiry looks like, right?
Mm-hmm,
Less than like actually trying to like dumb down ideas, right?
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And we have a motto here: read the damn book.
Read the damn book. Yeah.
Read the damn book. Right.
And maybe you will like spend your, because like where you are intellectually, and I'm not, and all right, and I'm closer to this than I am to like someone who can actually write a real book, right? It might take you a whole lifetime before you can sit down and actually read Plato's Euthyphro, book 1, right? And get that off the ground and really get it. But hey, better that, right, than not, right? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm increasingly I'm getting, and this is more like an Adler thing, is to get into, I'm more of a great books guy. Like let's just read the actual books, and if you don't get it, that's fine, right? We have other means of cultural transmission for you, right? Okay, or at least we did at one time, right? And I'm less worried about like how do we get everybody to understand complex philosophical ideas, because I'm not convinced everybody can or that they should. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. And I don't know if you've noticed, but I've done a mini series without Jim. It's been very sad, where I've been reading sections from Adler's How to Read a Book.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's really good. I mean, like, and like, honestly, like, what is a lot of that book? Well, it's a study of the 3 acts of the mind, right? If you,
it's
right,
logic,
it really
yeah.
is. It's really a logic book, right? With
Yeah.
some extra hints of getting the most out of your reading, right? Now, it's subtly disguised as something more than that, but anybody who's familiar with classical logic will immediately recognize what Adler's doing in that book, right?
I like right now in my metaphysics course I'm teaching, we're really just literally doing a Hegel read along in class, right? Where
That's fun, yeah.
where we've got the introduction to phenomenology of spirit, and we read a paragraph aloud, and then I go back through it and help them figure out what was going on in that very dense paragraph. So it's basically I'm showing them how to read that text, right? And I think to really do this, you have to go at that level. You have to get down and be taught how to do this with this book, right? Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. All right, let's take some questions right now. Let's start off with a fitness question or two just to warm up, and then we'll get into the more dense philosophy. Here Burwatt says, "Hey, both. What kettlebell workout would you recommend for somebody that is training for triathlon but wants to do some strength work? Have you done much longer endurance sport, Jim?"
I did a triathlon.
Did you?
Yeah, I did 2 of them actually. Yeah.
Nice.
And
Jim's done it all. Yeah,
I've done it all, man. I rode a single speed steel frame fixie for the bike portion.
Dang.
Right. And I tell you, man, I can ride a bike. I can make a bike haul. Right. But I can't swim for a damn. So I remember I came out of the pool like 63rd out of 65 competitors. Okay. And like literally like I beat a guy in a wheelchair, right? That was it, right? Okay, and so I get on the bike. I come in on the bike in 18th place.
Yeah.
Right. So I passed like 40 people on the bike.
Nice.
If you want to cause someone despair, like you get like cycling guy with his like super tricked out, triathlon bike, and you pass him on a single speed fixie. Right. That's causing despair. Right. And then I think I lost 2 positions in the run and came in like 20th place. Right?
Nice.
It was a short triathlon. But
so you're the opposite of my wife. My wife used to be really big into endurance events, but she was great at swimming, terrible at the bike.
Really? Yeah.
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 So anyways, what do you recommend then for the supplemental strength work for that?
I think if you want a course in the box for supplemental strength work on almost anything athletic, I would go Pavel Simple and Sinister.
Always easy. Right.
Do some swings, do some get-ups. It's going to check all the boxes in terms of all the different joints that you're going to want to work through, right? And very easy to execute. It's not taxing, so you could very easily do those workouts in the AM and go for, to put in your road time in the evenings, right? I think Simple and Sinister is a very easy answer there. And just in general, do some swings. Don't like you're going to get all the real long work you need in your triathlon training, right? So do some swings, but think of it in terms of heavy and explosive, not like lung burn, right? Yeah. Do some get-ups or some squats or some presses for some grinds, right? But keep it low taxing, right? You just want to make sure you are strong enough to do the work you want to do on your other events. And to be a triathlete, you don't have to be terribly strong to do that.
That's right. You just want to make sure you're filling gaps and that you're not draining yourself, that your specific practice is suffering. So no, yeah, spot on. Something like simple and sinister. Yeah, something like simple and sinister would be a great fit there. 100%. All right, one more fitness question, then we'll turn to philosophy here, unless people want to you can send whatever you want, guys. Anything's fair game on Whacky Wednesday. Jared says, for Pat and Jim, what kettlebell programs did you personally notice the biggest body composition changes? Also, have you read The Ape That Understands the Universe? So the second question is no for me. I have not read it. Do you recommend it, Jared? Let us know. So what is it about? As for the first question, what kettlebell programs did you personally notice the biggest body? It says competition, but I think it means composition changes. You go first. Good sir.
Well, I mean, I did lose 100 pounds of blubber doing Enter the Kettlebell. So
100 pounds of blubber is that is a composition change, indeed.
Right. But you know, when you start out with 100 pounds of blubber to lose, you know, I mean that's low hanging.
What did you do with that 100 pounds of blubber, Jim? You still got it around?
That's pretty sick. Yeah, I buried it deep.
Burned it.
Burned it in my soul. I still see it in the mirror though, right?
Yeah.
No, and so like once again, like when you're going from like really dangerously obese, I mean, did I greatly improve my body composition doing that? Yes, I did, right?
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's simple and sinister. It's not really Enter the Kettlebell. It's not really designed to do that. It's designed to be really an overall like strength and conditioning thing for other stuff, right?
Yeah, but you dialed in the nutrition.
I dialed in the nutrition. Yeah. Okay. I think if probably since like going from being like an extremely fat person to like at a more normal body composition, I probably got my biggest bang out of some of the On It 6 stuff, like the On It 6 kettlebell program. But there too, that's right around the time I started experimenting with keto for the first time. So there's two variables in there, so.
Indeed. Yeah. Let me just say this. Personally, I don't know. For me, honestly, I've had happy results with a number of programs, but I'll say this, having helped many, many people experience quite significant changes in body composition, include a number of people who have themselves lost over 100 pounds of blubber. I will say a very common theme. In fact, one of my first clients in college, Deanna, she lost over 100 pounds of blubber, was this, and I think, Jim, I don't know if this is true for you or not, but it wasn't, looking back, it wasn't anything magical about the exercise programming. It was, the nutrition was in place, but there was something that really pulled them in.
Yes.
That was beyond the body composition. They fell in love with the actual tool itself. So Deanna, for example, she just loved the kettlebell. She loved the workouts. And like very quickly on, within like 2 months, she decided, I want to coach this. I want to get my certification. And it was that mindset shift that I think is why she lost 100 pounds and now is a coach, right? And now is a coach. And it wasn't, and like, it wasn't the swings and the get-ups specifically over doing front squats or anything else. It was the fact that she could set her goals on something beyond the scale, beyond the gym. And of course, she worked very hard at her nutrition as well. And I'm just trying to highlight a different aspect of it that I think often gets overlooked.
No, and that's my view too, is I don't think body composition alone is going to be enough to sustain you. Like you need to want to get good at something.
Yes, right? That's it.
And for me, man, I wanted to pass the rite of passage. I wanted to pass that snatch test, and I wanted to press that kettlebell half my body weight, and I did it. Right. And that really sustained it. And even and I actually got to those marks fairly early in the process because I was started out super strong. Okay. But just the idea that I wanted, when you do the old Enter the Kettlebell and you roll the dice for your swings and you roll the box cars, so you got 12 minutes, man. I wanted that 300 swings.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to do it. Right. And that was always a goal. And having that, like wanting to become like a kettlebell master of just those two movements, that was enough to motivate me.
That's it. There's something about getting a badge of honor. Let's call it that. Right. Having a program where you can earn a badge of honor, whatever it is, a certification. And we do this in Strong On, right? We have sort of different challenges at the end of different phases, real physical feat, right? So just keep that in mind. But I mean, for body composition, good. Do the fundamentals, get your nutrition in place. You'll be a happy person, but all right. Jim, what are your thoughts on the moral argument? Wants to know, gentle listener, Andre.
I guess like the moral argument for God's existence.
Yeah. Well, which one, I guess, is the...
Yeah. Not a huge fan in its standard form, right? Because I think it presupposes a kind of deontological ethic that I don't really buy, right? Okay. And so now if you look at Kant's actual so-called moral argument for God's existence, it's so different than what people generally put forward. Okay, but just leaving that aside, do I think though, in order to make ultimate sense of human action, there needs to be a sunum bonum? Yes, I do. Okay,
Yeah.
but that's different from the standard ways that you see.
Let's take the standard one, right? If I think of like the standard Bill Craig version, right? He'll say something like this. Correct me if I'm wrong. All the gentle listeners who follow Bill Craig. He'll say, yeah, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist, but they do exist. Therefore, God exists. And I'm with you, man. I do not think that is a very good argument. And in fact, I was just talking with Josh Rasmussen about this today in private correspondence, because the way this is a good exercise, right? And it's paradigm thinking. I was talking to Josh. I'm like, if I were still a naturalist, which I'm not, like, what would I do to try and secure objective morality, right? Like, what would that look like? And assuming that I would want to do that rather than explain it away. Many naturalists are okay with just trying to develop some sort of error theory, right?
Yep.
Now, I think naturalists are realizing that's a cost that is probably too significant to bear anymore, right? For various reasons. So more naturalists are seeming to want to try and wire something into their theory to make sense of our moral experience and secure objectivity. And the best answer I can come up with, Jim, is that I would just do my damnedest to still be an Aristotelian, right?
Yeah, right.
That's it. I would say, look, I'm a naturalist, but we got essences and names, right?
Yep.
And then but the reason I'm not a naturalist Aristotelian is I think ultimately to make sense of that, you do need theism, right? So I was talking to Josh. I'm like, to my mind, the moral argument really just ultimately sort of bleeds into a greater cosmological argument, right? Like if you see what I'm going
as Plato said, right? You know what I mean? So at the end of the day, like I see, like the kind of Platonic Aristotelian versions of first cause arguments and moral arguments. I don't want to say moral arguments from ethos, right? Arguments from the ethics bleed into much the same thing. We're looking for an ultimate explanation of the order of things as we find it, right?
Yeah.
And we do find an order of goods in nature, and it does seem that has to terminate in some highest good, right? So
right, yeah. And we can when we're talking about morality, this is interesting. I want to think about this a little bit more because I was literally just thinking about it today. So for this book I wrote, because in this book, which is an argument for theism, I actually do not give a moral argument. And part of the reason I don't give a moral argument is because I don't think that I found a moral argument that ultimately stands like entirely independent of the cosmological argument. You see? Right. So in that sense, I'm just like, whatever. However, I do think in order to make the best sense of our moral experience, we need to be able to explain things like natures, like teleology, like rationality, right? And I think theism has far better resources for that than naturalism, right? So if we just do like other things equal, what worldview can make the best sense of this? I think there's that move we can make, right? And like, let's not discount that, right? It's like, even if a naturalist wants to say, okay, we're just going to like put principles of morality as a brute necessity into our theory, which some will do, right? Okay, but it's still a rational enterprise. And now you got to tell me how you make room for the space of reasons and how you can freely choose between that, right? Because it's not enough just to have principles of morality in your theory. We need like some connection to them and some way to deliberate upon and make room for moral agency and responsibility too, right? So these things are deeply connected, right? And like a naturalist just kind of like shoehorning one thing into the theory, to my mind, is still inadequate, right? In many significant ways, where all those problems I think are easily solved by a theistic worldview, right?
So I mean, I think, as you know, I've been really obsessed with this idea that I think I've learned from Plato finally, and I think I'm seeing it in Aristotle too, is that you cannot separate metaphysics and politics. You cannot separate politics and metaphysics, right? And and where in that Greek sense of where ethics and politics are like just two stages of the same thing, right? And so there's interesting stuff on this in like Plato's Parmenides too. So in order for us like to like the many have to come from the one, right? In Plato's view, both in metaphysics and in ethics, right? Do you see what I mean? If there isn't a real unity behind things, there's no fact about the judgments we make, right? In terms of what we ought to do, and like there's no fact about the judgments of what we ought to think to be true, right? There has to be a one, right? So there's a symmetry of arguments here, right? In the two realms for Plato, and I think Aristotle too. Okay, and so it's not an accidental symmetry because these are just two different like analogous contours on the same reality, right? Do you see what I mean? And so and it's not, I mean, because what I worry about like their standard moral arguments, it just comes down to, well, if God weren't this really mean guy who would punish me if I didn't do it, I would go out and cheat on my wife right now. Right? I mean, I think that's kind of what's like the premise in there, right?
That's certainly a crude version that's out there.
Like you don't like, you know, I always say like, look, if you told me tomorrow there's no afterlife, I would not immediately go out and cheat on my wife. In fact, it is not the promise of damnation or salvation that's keeping me from cheating on my wife. It's constitutive of good life, right? But for there to be constituents of a good thing overall, the many has to terminate in a one, right?
Yeah.
And that's what holds it all together. It's not because I'm afraid God's going to punish me, right? And I worry about I mean, I know this is unfair to like a lot of people, but I mean, I think there is in a lot of these cases in the background that kind of like divine command theory, right? Which is really to say there's no such thing as the good. Right.
Yeah. Well, we should explain that to the people, like these different ways to think about ethics, right? So classical theists aren't really divine command ethicists, right? This is something that you see, I guess, in sort of definitely more prominent in among analytic Protestant philosophers, right? Divine command ethics, and I think it does that perspective does struggle with Euthyphro dilemma, right? It does, and some of them will actively just take one of the horns, right? Something is good because God commands it, right?
And they're serving up Friedrich Nietzsche his entire critique.
Yes, 100%, right?
Here you go, Nietzsche. Here's a hard one for you to hit out of the park, right? I mean,
right, but the perspective of the great tradition, let's call it, and the classical theists, we might even argue Plato himself, right? Is there's the form of the good, which classical theists later would say just is God's nature itself. This is just a good itself, right? And then there are participated goods, right? That have particular natures, and those natures have inherent ways that they can be perfected, right? And we can reason about that without like directly thinking about God, right? Because nature itself is intelligible, and that is critical, right? So we can engage a good amount of moral reasoning without requiring revelation. Not to say that revelation is not important, but we can do moral reasoning as Aristotle and Plato did, right? Just by reflecting on the inherent intelligibility of nature as finite participated goods that ultimately derive from the ultimate good, the self-subsistent good.
And to obtain the participated goods is to participate in the good, right? It's not, you know what I mean? It's not like there's not a separate effect there. Do you see what I mean? Like,
right. It is to participate in the life of God, literally.
In the life of God. You know, Plato, it's pretty clear that's what Plato's talking about. And it's pretty clear that's what Aristotle's talking about. Right.
And that perspective, Jim, I think so many pseudo problems of philosophy of religion, including things like divine hiddenness, because it shows like God cares about our moral perfection, our becoming holiness, right? So like we actually can have a relationship with God even if we were at somewhat of an epistemic distance of God's existence. So insofar as we are participating in the good life, right?
So when a philosopher says, look, if there is no God, then there's no grounding for moral obligation or something like that. There's no reason to do your duty and all that. Like Aristotle would look at that and say, yeah, only a complete Philistine would believe that. He really would, because he said, it's interesting in Plato and Aristotle. We talked about this in the Republic series. They ultimately justify what they're calling the good life in terms of the level of pleasure it affords. Right. And they say, if you had lived the good life, you would realize the other lives cannot compete at the level of pleasure. Right.
Yeah.
And so you do not have a refined development of taste that only comes from actual living the right way that would let you say, no, I've tried the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I've tried, the way of the warrior, and I've tried the way of, of the good life, right? And the last one is the most pleasurable, right? And so like literally they would say to someone who's giving divine command theory, like, you are a Philistine, you are not cultured enough, right? You are not cultured enough to really realize what the good of this way of life is, right?
Yeah, and that's not to say there aren't deep connections between. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there aren't deep connections between the moral life and God. I think they're intimately connected. I just don't think the way that I guess modern apologists present it is in any way sophisticated, right?
No, it's not. That's not.
It's just not, right?
You know what I mean? And so it's like their view is that the best we can do is what Aristotle would call its moral continence, right? Like, do you know what I mean? Like we're held to this because we know it's the right thing to do, not because we see it intrinsically enjoyable.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is right. And like, this is I can say this is true by experience, right? Pat Flynn tried the sex, not drugs, but rock and roll, right? Stayed away from most of the drugs, thankfully, right? And like,
we don't talk much on this show about the years from 1991 to 1999.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a period of Pat Flynn's life we don't talk much about either, right? But I can tell you, right?
Right, yeah, right.
After the difference
philosophy, the record goes black there. It's been redacted.
Yeah. But I don't want to speak for Jim, but for me, like, I had a taste of the life of the Philistine, and then and now I have the life where philosophy led me in conversion, and I'm deeply in agreement with Plato and Aristotle here. Like, I ain't going back to that, right? It's just not going to happen, right?
Yeah, and honestly, like their reply to like the moral skeptic, like, well, why would I do this? Is, well, if you have to ask, you're clearly like a lousy Philistine. You like, you have to ask, you're just, you can't afford it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And I know that doesn't like solve the debate, right? But I do think there is such a thing as epistemic privilege. Like, some people know things better because of their position, right?
Yeah,
their contingent position, right?
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's move on. That was fun. This is a good.
Now that we
now that we were sufficiently condescending,
Philistines, right? Commoners.
All right,
but I'm not blinking.
We're staying firm. Catholic base is logical positivism compatible with rationalism? Well, first off, are there any of either remaining?
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Is the Stegosaurus compatible with the Triceratops? Right.
It's a really interesting question, but I'm just like trying to figure out what the.
No, there's a guy, I can't remember his name, at UCLA, I think, who's like, he's trying to bring back logical positivism. He's like,
in a cool
Carnap
way.
got it right. Yeah, but he also thinks that they were misread, and they really should have been seen as neo-Kantian, not neo-Humean.
Sure. All right. So give us a background about logical positivism, right? As a theory of meaning.
Yeah. Good point. So, like, in fairness, like, logical positivism originally comes out as a theory of meaning. It's to say that a proposition has cognitive significance, meaning it's not either a contradiction or a tautology if and only if there are like articulable conditions of empirical verification for that proposition. Okay. So a proposition means the state of affairs that would show it to be either true or false. Like there's different versions of it, right? And if there is no state of affairs,
it's
that would show it's either a contradiction or it's a tautology. Okay. My own view is that this basically comes out of a misreading of Wittgenstein's Tractatus. Okay. And I think it actually was Wittgenstein's view, but it was the dominant philosophy of language, philosophy of science, for a generation in the English-speaking world, and to some extent in the German-speaking world too, right? The less dominant there, because you had the phenomenological tradition, like seeing that for the craziness that it was and rebelling against it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and so some people, this is debatable, will see logical positivism as ultimately stemming from Hume. Okay, and I think there's much to be said for that. All right, and in that sense, it is definitely not rationalism, because like a rationalist is actually claiming there are a priori truths that are cognitively significant, like synthetic a priori, as famously is put by someone else, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But there are synthetic a priori. There are cognitively significant truths that we cannot spell out any empirically verifiable circumstances that would show them to be either true or false.
Right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so basically a rationalist thinks we can prove something synthetic in an exercise utterly independent of any sort of tethering it to empirical verification. Whereas a positivist is saying if you can't tether a claim to empirical verification, it's just not even a judgment.
Right.
Right. Right.
It's literally meaningless. Right.
Meaningless. Yeah. Right. It's meaningless. Okay. So if what we mean by standard rationalism is sort of the sort of thing that Leibniz is up to, and if what we mean by logical positivism is what A.J. Ayer was up to, and that's definitely a Humean version of the story, then those cannot be the same thing. That they define each other negatively, right?
Yeah.
Maybe some of these other people may have convinced me that Carnap might have been different, and Carnap like changes his mind about a lot of things, but for the most part, I would say positivism and rationalism are antithetical.
Yeah. Interesting question though. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Well done, Catholic Priest.
Yeah, very, very, very good. Right. All right. Let's keep moving along. Keep sending the questions in, gentle listeners. And next one comes from TB Cop. Got a cop here. Freeze. What are your thoughts on skeptical theism? Yeah. Again, broad camp, right? So there's a lot of different skeptical theists out there.
Yeah.
Maybe we should give a background about skeptic. Jim, you would probably classify yourself maybe more as a skeptical theist than I think I would, right?
Yeah. I am. Well, so a skeptical theist is someone. Well, a skeptical theist is someone who says, look, that the claim that the amount of evil or suffering or what have you that we encounter in the world is inconsistent with God's existence, right? Presupposes that the atheist could tell us then how much evil in the world would not be inconsistent with God's existence, right? That the atheist has made a claim that on empirical grounds, this is an interesting connection to the positive question. On empirical grounds, we're saying God doesn't exist because there's too much evil in the world, right? The skeptical theist is saying, well, how much would we expect there? How much could we tolerate there being and still say that God exists, right? And the skeptical theist will argue that there is no such position to be had, right? That in fact, if God exists, we have reasons to think we would not know all the goods that would be available to justify the evil that's there, right? So then the skeptical theist is implicitly saying, right, you could never argue for atheism based on the amount of evil occurrent in the world. Right. Right. And I have some pretty deep sympathies to that view.
Right? Yeah, I think like in the literature, the skeptical theists have won out. Right. Yeah. I think they've won that debate. I just like
whether it's the best way to think about theism, no way in hell. We're playing Bayesian tennis now, and I just can't stop myself.
Right? Yeah. So like I can say like, hey, I think those guys won the debate, but I maybe don't think about it differently, which I think I do. And my position is like I just try to strike a middle ground between. Yeah, I just don't want to be so strongly skeptical, right? I guess I take a more moderate skepticism, and a lot of it comes down to, again, to degrees of expectation, right? Where I want to say, there are, I can't say exactly where the line is, and Jim, we've talked about this before, but there is clear, like I would know when something's over it at least, right? I'm willing to say that, and there are, and this is where I kind of. I guess part even from people like Brian Davis is that I think we can have fairly strong expectations of God, right? And it's not because God has moral obligations in a sense we do. That's a mistake. So when Brian Davis says that God is not a moral agent, he's spot on. But I see people, I think, becoming too skeptical in the sense that we can't have any moral expectations of God. And I think we can. And Aquinas clearly thought we could too, right? So Aquinas would say, look, God isn't going to blip the world out of existence for no reason 5 seconds from now. Now, why is that? Well, it's not because God has an obligation from something over and above God to keep it into existence. It's because it would be irrational, right? It would make no sense. And God, in virtue of being perfectly rational, isn't in the business of nonsense, right?
Yeah.
So I would say there's thresholds of nonsense, right? That to me can kind of structure us in such a way to not be overly or unduly skeptical.
Unless
you see
though
what I'm saying?
unless we think though that if God exists, then there's resources of sense making that would be beyond our ken.
So build that out.
So I mean, I think this is the Weikstra point, is that if you think God exists, then you have something like a defeater in place to say that humans really know the full story about what counts for making sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
See what I mean?
Right. Yeah. So where I'm gonna I think my biggest departure on people with skeptical theists, right, is I'm a big intuition guy in epistemology. I'm a big intuition guy, and I think it's always a significant cost if you have to bite the bullet on an intuition, right?
Yeah.
And we've got lots of intuitions on things. So I see what you're saying. I see what the skeptical theist says. I guess want to moderate the position where we can make what I would say is the best sense of our best intuitions. And this is how I think about modality too, right?
Yep.
And cosmological arguments is like, one of the reasons I think naturalism is ridiculous is on some of their fundamental theories, we'd have to bite ridiculous bullets on our logical intuitions, especially concerning possibility. And to me, like, that probably invites like radically skeptical scenarios, and it's hugely costly in terms of epistemology. So I'm just trying to be consistent as a theist too. You see what I'm saying? Like, I'm just trying to be consistent. Like, if I don't want to bite bullets, if the reason I'm not a naturalist is because I don't want to bite a whole bunch of bullets, well, I don't want to bite a whole bunch of bullets as a theist either. You see what I'm saying, right? And intuitions for me in epistemology play a huge role in a way I think about a lot of things, right?
So, I mean, I have deep sympathies with skeptical theism. I think they win the debate. I think my own view is really the book of Job, right? And Job, complains to the whirlwind. The whirlwind just says back, "Hey, where were you when I made worlds, son?" Right?
I get that.
It's a question whether we have grounds for complaint. Is my thing, right? But let me something I want to because to make sure I'm being fair to skeptical theism, I think a good way to explain it. This is something similar, I think, to how Weikstra explains it in the original article, right? Is if I said right now, there's not an elephant in the room, right? That would be very easy for us to buy that because we would expect the room to appear differently than it does right now if there were an elephant in here.
Right.
Right. Okay. If I said right now, there's no free floating helium gas in this room,
or paramecium or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's no, there's no E. coli bacteria in this room. Right. Absolutely. I do not have grounds for saying that because we would not, based on the appearance of the room, because we would not expect the room to appear any differently than it does now if there's E. coli in here or there's helium in here or something like that. Do you see what I mean? So you can only appeal to appearances to the degree to which you could say it appears this way or it appears not that way, and I can tell you what would be different. Does that make sense? Right. And I think that's kind of the brilliant move that Weikstra makes contra Rowe. Like Rowe says, it really doesn't look like God's around, right?
Right.
And Weikstra says, okay, how would it be different if he were around, right? And it's not, and so and people miss Weikstra. He's not saying therefore he's around. No, what he's saying is therefore Rowe, just based on appearance, has not given me a reason to think God's not around because he hasn't told me how things would be different if God were around.
Yes, right. And that's spot on. I agree with that, right? And then if you have independent reasons to already think that God is around, then Rowe's argument just it falls flat, right? Yeah.
And this is where Davies goes, and I do think this is interesting, right? He says, and I think others do this, but my personal favorite on this is Brian Davies, right? Where he'll say, look, okay, if take like some of your best Bill Rowe apparently gratuitous suffering examples of like, deer being burnt alive in the forest where no one can like witness it and thereby grow morally from it, or children suffering terrible deaths where nobody has an occasion to like rise up from or something like that, right? Seemingly absolutely gratuitous, right? And like what Davis will say, and Draper says this too, is look, if you're saying that's morally justifiable by some good beyond our ken, I don't know what the hell we mean by moral justification anymore. Right? Like you have to ask yourself, like, what's more likely, that there's some good beyond our ken that justifies that, or God doesn't exist? Right? That seems to me you're talking inscrutable calculation there right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And therefore, I think your skeptical theism is like doing a lot less work than you think it would. Right.
Right. Yeah.
If you're saying, oh, for all I know, God could have a very good reason for the torture of that child, right? then I don't know what it means to say there is a good reason for that. And then that I have to like weigh that uncertainty against the supposed certainty I have for God's existence. And now it looks like, it's unclear who wins that Bayesian game.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
And once it becomes inscrutable, it's a wash.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And Davies' moves basically say, yeah, you're right, but God doesn't need reasons.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Davis is so important for this debate because he brings so much conceptual clarity from the perspective of classical theism, right?
Yeah.
And that's essential, right?
Yeah.
And I agree with everything Davis says about God not being a moral agent, not under the obligations that we are. I just tried to moderate my skepticism, which is enough to affirm everything that you just said, without also thinking that there's like nothing that could be beyond the line. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so good stuff. And there's what's the other thing? There's some other just like kind of really dumb question begging things made in response to skeptical theists, right? Well, look, in this situation of this seemingly gratuitous evil, there's only a 1 in 4 chance that it could be redeemable. Well, if God exists, he would obviously hit the 1 in 4, right? It's like that's an awful calculation. Anyway, it's a good question. So we'll move on here.
There's a jiu-jitsu question there from Samuel.
Hit it.
He says, one.
Gotta take a hard left.
Take a hard left? Yeah, go ahead and read it.
I get the feeling that Jim is a big half guard player in BJJ. What are your favorite attacks from that position? And are there other styles that cramp your game?
If you want to know my favorite attacks, Samuel, St. Joe BJJ tonight. Right. Let's
be
go.
There.
Be there. I'm not gonna tell you until we roll, man. No. I do my best. I do play half guard. I am a half guard player. I try not to play half guard. Okay. But all my partners, they just like intuitively jump into my half guard. Right. Okay. But I really, really like to struggle into like what's called a classic wrestling position of the dogfight position and then turn it into a wrestling match from our knees. I do very, very well from there. Right.
Yeah.
Short of that, I tend to want to get into a classic like Tom DeBlas deep half. And then I have some very good sweeps from there. Right. I don't attack many submissions except for Kimura from half guard. But I do like to get into that wrestle up dogfight position. And I do like to get into a classical deep half position. Also have a pretty good cinnamon roll sweep too. So,
yeah, we were actually practicing a lot of half guard sweeps yesterday. So
really excellent, nice, nice.
Yeah.
And for me, the half guard thing, I was a white belt and I just done a tournament and my coach sat me down with the videos and he's like, if you could have played half guard, you would have won this match, this match, this match. He's like, you will play half guard from here on out. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And it really does something about my build. And if you look at, I'm kind of built like Tom DeBlas too. Right.
My
build, my particular,
he was just at Sam's gym.
Yeah. You told me that, yeah. And so basically what half guard lets me do is to turn it into a wrestling match from my back. Right. And that fits my physiological profile really well. I think.
Were you a wrestler, Jim, in high school or college?
I wrestled from like 4th grade till my freshman year of high school, and then the program died. Right. And then my freshman year in college, I used to go and roll around with the wrestlers at the college I was at. Right. And so wrestling had always kind of been in my background. I probably should have been a wrestler rather than a football player. Right.
Yeah.
Just because I'm only 5'8".
Right.
It just didn't work out. So I think by disposition I was wrestling. And then the first sport, like the most like formative sport in my youth from like 4th grade to like 9th grade was wrestling.
Yeah. Great base to have that.
Yeah.
Haley says no alpaca. I came for the alpaca. So if you Jim, if you didn't see the thumbnail, it was us with a romantic alpaca scene.
Was it?
Back.
Well,
so a little false advertising. Sorry, Haley.
Haley, I'm sorry. I'm disappointed too.
Yeah, we're all let down here. You got to learn to hedge your expectations for the podcast. All right, let us see here. Danny says, thoughts on the presuppositional epistemology of someone like Jay Dyer. He recently debated Trent Horn on whether Christians should reject natural theology. Well, I can't speak on that debate because I didn't see it.
It's above my pay grade there. Yeah.
What do you think about presuppositional epistemology, though, Jim?
What is it? I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, I don't know. Let me bracket Jay because I don't know his position, so I don't want to caricature or straw man somebody. But yeah, I mean, I guess the tact. I've never been overly impressed by presuppositionalists, because the idea is like, in order to even know anything, you already are assuming either God or even the Trinity. I've heard them go like that far, stuff like that. And I think a couple distinctions could be helpful here. One is, I think, like, yeah, God is the necessary condition for knowledge, but we don't start there, we arrive there. And it seems to me like presupps are thinking that the assumption of God is the necessary condition for knowledge, and that's not true, right?
God's existence is not a premise in all arguments,
right?
That's Descartes, right? I mean, and I think there's a problem with that, because then you just lost your argument for God's existence, right?
Yeah. So if you want to say that, now if you want to push the ladder that you are assuming that the assumption of God, like, I don't know how you're gonna prove that unless you do natural theology anyways, in which case
seems like you're doing it now.
What was the point, right? So that, I guess, that would be my primary issue with it.
And does that make like God, I'm speculating here, right? But like, does that make God's existence as an enthematic premise in your argument against arguments for God's existence? I mean, that's not inconsistent. It's ironic, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not familiar with this, because I spend most of my time now like reading books by like Russian Platonists that have been banned on YouTube. But
it's amazing. Much better use of
much better use one's time. Actually, yes,
That needs so many of these contemporary. I don't spend much time with it. The sort of apologetics. It's something I kind of got like wrapped into. I mean, I write for like Catholic Answers and a lot of other sites that are apologetics, but like, I just love philosophy, right?
Yep.
And it just so happens that my background in philosophy, people have found to be useful apologetically, and I'm always happy to do that. But like, to be clear, like, I am not.
Exactly.
Like, I do not see myself as somebody who's meant to be like, when I think of an apologist for a particular position, it's somebody who's constantly scanning and seeing like, what are the objections today, right? And I better go and figure out how to. And it's always reactionary, right? That's never how I've been. I've always just been interested in what I'm interested in, and I just study deeply in that. And then occasionally it happens to be useful to people who are interested in apologetics, and that just is how it winds up, right?
So think of the first book of Aristotle's Metaphysics, where he works his way from the like just animal consciousness to human experience to craft to natural science to metaphysics, right? And it's a movement from consciousness or knowing, from completely subsumed to the practical to utterly liberated from it. Okay. And for Aristotle, it's this, in Plato too, we have to make our way up, and not everyone's going to get all the way up to it, right?
Yeah.
Make our way up this tree of going from complete, servility to the practical to utter liberation from it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is apologetics? It's like, it's on that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's actual abstractive, rational thinking, but still subservient to something else,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not thought for its own sake. It's thought for the sake of, defending something, right? Whereas like by the time, like to get to the top of the ladder, you're utterly liberated from even concern of convincing somebody.
Yeah.
And you're just doing this as a contemplative act, as a contemplative exercise, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but it's going to take, but I think everyone's going to go through an apologetic phase, right? Because you have to learn the practical craft of conviction in order to get beyond it, to actually then really just be worried about convincing yourself, right? In the contemplative act. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And for me, I just always wanted to know what's the case, what's the deal, right?
What's going on?
What's true? Yeah. What's going on? Yeah. Callum has a question. Pat, would you be interested in bringing on J.D. Atkins? He's a New Testament scholar whose dissertation defended the resurrection accounts in Luke and John, at crafting them to combat Docetism. Groundbreaking. Yeah, man. If you have a contact information or connection, I would be happy.
Yeah.
Jim and I will dialogue with anybody.
And we're no fans of Docetism, so let's go.
Yeah. So definitely, if just my only thing is, if you want me to bring guests on, I just have one request: make it easy for me. Like, make the connection through email. Because if you just tell me that I have to go track down somebody or reach, I'm just not going to do it. It's just not going to happen. But if you make it easy for me, totally. That's it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Is that we can fill airtime. That's not our problem.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I just got enough things on my plate that I'm just It's just not going to happen. All right, let's see here. Pat, have you heard of Stu McGill? Indeed, I have. World-renowned spine doctor, right? Has done work with Pavel. I can't say I've engaged or read a lot of his material. How about you, Jim?
He's the guy in all of Pavel's books who's like hooking up Pavel to electrodes while he's deadlifting.
Yeah, right.
Right. Yeah.
He just turns Pavel into a science experiment. Yeah,
exactly.
Mm-hmm. But from what I understand about Stu, he's
great,
great on the spine, and tends to really endorse the usefulness of kettlebell training for keeping your back healthy. That's cool. Yeah. Let's see here, Jim. Feel free to pick any out that interests you as well. Don't let me dominate the moderation here. Good questions so far.
So what's the one that came in here from Leighton? Your comments are created by an invisible pink glittery unicorn. Only I can see it because I believe. There can be no debate about this. Now we can proceed with facts.
It's really profound, Jim.
Profound, yeah. No, I mean, but I'll say this is if I understand what Leighton's up to, this is a legit thing. That this is Bertrand Russell's like giant. Was it
the teapot? Yeah, right.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And so, if indeed theism or anything else gets to the point where it is absolutely unfalsifiable, right? We could adjust this theory to any. This is like where like the positivist like has something going for it, right? Mm-hmm. Is that if our claims can be adjusted, they're so plastic they can be adjusted to any possible outcome, then they don't make sense of the world. Right.
And what am I going to say that is? It's freaking naturalism, right? Yeah. Because we've talked about this before. It can't define itself within its own boundaries, and it keeps expanding itself to just like, it's pressure tested, it fails, and it's like, oh, we got to expand the definition of natural now, right?
There are versions of theism doing that too, right?
Yeah, the sword cuts both ways on these types of objections, and that's why I push back against the fierce type of skepticism, because I want my commitments to be meaningful, right? Like, if you can't have some threshold that could be crossed where you would at least be willing to question your commitments, then you don't have a meaningful commitment. And I know, Jim, we're on firm agreement about this, but there's also just like, I was talking about this with a guy on his channel yesterday, right? There are broad degrees of expectation from certain like hypotheses, right? That make relevant differences. We're talking about Santa Claus, right? Sometimes people make the silly thing about God's no better than Santa Claus, right? Remarks like this. Well, the reason we don't believe in Santa Claus, if this is news to anybody, is because the types of things that we would expect if Santa Claus were real, we don't find, right? I don't find the fat guy coming down my chimney once a year.
Right.
We scan the North Pole. We don't find the shop with elves, right? He's not on the radar, right? Yeah. So we would have reasonable degrees of expectation of things that would show up if the Santa were real. Plus we know like where Santa actually came from, right? Like we like have good historical right emergence of the myth of Santa Claus, right? Yeah. But then we can ask the same thing about God, right? We have the classical theistic conception of God. What would I expect from that? Yeah. And one of the arguments in developing my book is like pretty much everything we see, and some of the data is so obvious that people overlook it. One of the most obvious is just the simple fact that there are concrete, causally capable objects, right? Now, what does the classical theist model predict? With 100% certainty, there will be concrete, causally capable objects, right? Yeah. And now that's such a broad statement, but it's not insignificant. In fact, it's really profound. What other naturalistic theory 100% predicts that? Yeah. None, and, right?
And leaving aside like who's better off relative to each other, theism or atheism, right? You can see, and I love that he's bringing this up. I'm sorry, I don't have my glasses on. It's something Darnay Leighton, right? Says you may be able to learn from it if you believe. I have no evidence, but that doesn't matter to theists, right? Well, I always want to like
we got the fundy.
I want to distinguish though between religion and theism. I think this gets like in these popular kinds of debates, they get confuted quite a bit, right? And to say that there is no evidence for theism is to, I think, beg the question in a controversial way as to what counts for evidence or not, right?
That's right.
You know what I mean? Okay. And I think one could say that all revealed religions are deeply underdetermined by the evidence or something like that, and yet still say there are good reasons for being a theist. Do you see? Okay, right?
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. But I think this sort of thing gets really confused. Okay. And I think it's very hard to say
Yeah.
there is none, never has been, never will be evidence for theism, because there are plenty of people that we would not identify as like conventional religious believers who actually were theists or were deeply wondering about this. Do you see what I mean? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, and that kind of thing, just, I always want to divide that question,
Yeah.
because I think usually what people mean is there's not like, you would never give it up. What they really mean is people wouldn't give up their fundamentalist version of religion, right?
Right. Yeah.
That's different from theism.
Yeah. I want to draw on this. I literally just had this conversation with a guy.
And I welcome
channel.
the listener raising these questions.
Yeah. As always. Right. So I literally just had this conversation yesterday. I just put the replay up from the interview, and we talked about what counts as evidence. Well, everybody can tell me what would count as evidence for them, right? And that's always a good thing to start with in conversation. But we just talked about it, right? We have a hypothesis. What would I expect on this hypothesis? Do I find that? And if so, it counts as evidence for that hypothesis, right? This is basic hypothesis testing, right? So then we can ask, from a model of classical theism, what would I reasonably expect, either with 100% certainty, or it would make relatively unsurprising the things that I see. And look, I'll play that game all day long with a naturalist. And I do play that game. And it is a game, right? As Jim and I say. And I think theism is overwhelmingly superior in every single respect. Now, let me come back to your point. Yeah, people of an uncultured mind cannot separate theism as a worldview, a large-scale competing theory of everything, from religion, or even more specifically Christianity. And that's just because of the contextual ignorance that they find themselves in, of having never read 5 good books on the subject, right? There's obviously many theists that aren't Christians, Catholics. You just have philosophical theists. You have Hindus who are monotheists, right? Muslims, Jews. I mean, you name it. They're all over the place, right? So if you're going to do worldview comparisons, you have to bracket all religious commitments first, and then you can still do the comparisons of religions, but that is of course a separate project. You had another point I wanted to build on, but at this point it's
and as you know, like I studiously avoid talking about religion, right? Okay, but I'll talk about theism, okay? Because once again, I think they're different things, and I think they're motivated by different things. We have a different relationship to them in terms of evidence, stuff like that. You know what I mean? And I just always want to be careful with the claim that there is no evidence for theism, right?
That's it. That's what I want to say. No smart atheist says that. No smart atheist says that. You read Graham Oppy, you read Paul Draper, they all say, every single one of them, there's not only evidence, but they also say there's impressive evidence for theism. Now they'll give counterpoints and say, well, here's why I'm more convinced of the naturalist paradigm. But
in fairness, no
smart atheist says that. No smart, intelligent, well-read atheist says there's no evidence for theists.
And also, though, I think often this goes back. This is a recurring theme for me, right? Is we conduct these debates as if they started in 1985. Okay, and I think to really understand this, whether or not there is or is not evidence for theism, even to think about it in terms of like evidence and what we mean today by evidence, no, you need to go back and read Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, right?
That's right.
Lucretius, their opponents, right? And see what was actually going on in those debates. And it's very different than like what we're seeing today. And if we want to actually like get a sense of what theism is or was, I think we've got to actually start with those texts again.
Right. Spot on. Yes. Raise the level of discourse, please.
But please to the listener, I'm not trying to like jump down your throat here, right?
No, that's my job.
That's Pat's job, right? Okay, his show. But I appreciate people raising those kinds of questions to us. Like that's what we want to do, right?
Right. Yeah. Spot on. Yes. Thank you for your contributions there, good sir. Good to have you here.
Horseman had a question, and Horseman's always money in questions here.
Here we go. Got it.
Yeah. What is strong enough? And I think he's actually referencing an article I wrote. Are you strong enough? Right. When strict strength training starts to be too risky, I'm asking about big lifts, squat, deadlift, bench, overhead. Can it be determined in relation to body weight? Well, okay, I would say first horseman if you're a sportsman and not just sports. Okay, if you're a powerlifter, you're never strong enough, right? Okay, right here. All right, you're strong enough when you win, right? But if you have a sport outside of the big lifts, outside of powerlifting, and by the way, that's maybe one of the problems with powerlifting is you're never strong enough, right?
It's kind of just built into the name of the game, right?
Yeah, the game, yeah. Is you're strong enough if you're not getting overpowered by your opponents in whatever you're training for, right? If your opponents are not beating you because they're stronger than you, right? Or you're missing opportunities to win because of a lack of strength, then you're not strong enough. But
that's a good measure.
And so like right now, I am not really trying to get stronger in my lifting because very rarely am I ever just flat overpowered by anybody when I'm doing jiu-jitsu. Right? It happens. There's some big, strong dudes out there, right? But it's usually when I lose, it's not because I was weak. It's because I was stupid or slow or tired, right?
Right.
So I have to work on not being stupid, slow, or tired, right? Not being stronger, right? So I think, what is it that you're trying to get strong for? And if you're not losing that because you're not strong enough, you might very well be strong enough, right?
Yeah. That is a really good point, right? There's yeah, I guess there are some exception cases though, right? So like when I go up against the 300-pound powerlifter in jiu-jitsu, like that dude's always going to be stronger than me, right? So I might still be strong enough even if I get occasionally overpowered by the freak, right? But if I'm like consistently just getting muscled around,
guys your size,
that's my size, then I'm not strong enough, right? Given the thing I want to succeed at, right?
Exactly. You know, and the thing too is just using jiu-jitsu as an example. Jiu-jitsu is not magic, right? So that like I am not going to out jiu-jitsu an NFL tackle. It's not happening. Right? That guy puts his hands on me, he kills me. Right? Okay, that's just a physical. It's like a different species of animal, right? Okay.
Right.
And so strength will make a difference, right? So I think that the key is, are you getting overpowered by people who are not just clearly bigger than you or half your age or something like that?
Yeah, spot on. By the way, Callum, I'm Pat Flynn at chroniclesofstrength.com is my email there. You can reach me there. Otherwise, Horseman, if you look at some of my conversations with Dan John the past year or two, we've done a number of episodes on just trying to identify reasonable strength standards for generalists. So I would say give those a Google, and we try to give ranges, right? It's hard to just like identify one, like this is it, right? But like, hey, here's kind of a floor, right? Try not to go below the floor, and here's a ceiling. Like if you're at the ceiling, like yeah, you're probably good enough, right? So good stuff. All right, Jim, we've jamming for a while. You want to pick the closer here?
Oh man, I'm always bad at this.
Good questions today, as usual, gentle listeners.
Let's see here. Let's see. This is Lewis Ratchet. When thinking about civil society, should we consider only its formal reason, which is natural and not supernatural, or through its absolutely last finality, which is supernatural? I don't know if it's a good question. I'm not sure.
Is this a question about integralism or?
Yeah. I think probably what's going on there is, really is how do we ultimately look at the relationship between the political and the metaphysical, right? Okay. And my view is we can only separate them at our detriment, right? But I worry that we have like made a large unrevocable decision to separate them, and so now I'm worried, right? Yeah, so there's my pessimism.
I'm with you. We'll build on that in a future episode. To be sure.
Exactly.
By the way, one more question was from Catholic Base. When are we doing our next Marcusa? That's a good question.
Maybe. Yeah, go ahead.
You're traveling this week, so it might just have to be next week at this point, then, right? Because
possibly
you take off tomorrow.
Special weekend edition or something.
Yeah, so it'll happen soon. Don't worry.
It'll happen soon.
By next week at the latest.
What is it's chapter 3, right? It's on it's on art and desublimation. I strongly encourage the listener to read that chapter. It's a very good chapter. I went back through it last night, and it is a very good chapter. We're gonna get Marcuse's views on sexuality in that chapter, which are interesting.
The book's going to get a little bit spicier.
We're getting to the dirty part.
Yeah, yeah. Which will be So we're gonna have fun with it. Thanks for the interest, though. We're having a lot of fun with this series. So after Marcuse, we're going to take the turn back to Aristotle. That's the plan, right? And
we should talk about this, but I would like to do the ethics and the politics in conjunction, the way Aristotle intended them,
as the man intended, and that's what we shall do. Excellent, Jim. Before we go, any other announcements you want to make? Anything else coming up?
Nope. Just getting ready to travel, party with my man Ramage.
Gonna deal some damage.
Gonna deal some damage with the Ramage.
Beautiful. All right.
I had a student of mine say today that he went looking for podcasts with me in him, and he found me with some guy talking about kettlebells and weighted pull-ups.
That's awesome.
I said, yeah, you'll get some of that too.
Yeah, those are out there indeed. Well, gentle listeners, thanks for tuning in. Please do like, share, comment, subscribe for the algorithm. Do it all for the algorithm. And please. We'll catch you next time, gentle listeners.
Welcome to the machine.